He's the most accomplished dual-threat quarterback and retired with the #1 passer rating in NFL history. Bill Walsh said he was the most accurate passer he ever saw. Fran Tarkenton, the OG dual-threat quarterback, called Young the greatest running quarterback he's ever seen. So let me argue this case in more detail. Whatever way you slice it, Steve Young was dominant. Dominant may even be an understatement. As he was this dual-threat quarterback, we'll split his game into two. First, let's look at his running game. If you looked at Steve Young's film early in his career, you wouldn't be thinking he's going to be one of the greatest quarterbacks ever when he retires. Why? He was talented, but his game was raw and his scrambling was all over the place. Maybe reckless, but Young was putting his body on the line every time he ran. He suffered 7 recorded concussions and was knocked out 10 times in his career. But it made sense. He had to run to protect himself, because his O-line sure wasn't going to. He spent his first 2 years in the USFL with the LA Express. He even had to play running back for the team when everybody else was injured. However, he didn't choose the LA Express due to a lack of talent. The Bengals planned to draft him #1 overall, but he'd get more money in the USFL and get to start immediately. His career didn't get off to a hot start though. 16 touchdown passes and 22 interceptions, with a 56.4% completion percentage. But in 2 years, he did run for 883 yards, for an average of 6.5 yards per run, and 9 touchdowns. The league would end up folding by 1986, and the Bucks drafted him in the supplemental draft. He'd spend 2 years with them, and they were pretty miserable, as they'd only win 4 games in 2 seasons. And he didn't have great numbers at Tampa either. 11 touchdown throws, 21 interceptions, and a 53.3% completion percentage. Obviously that's not all his fault. No protection, a conservative offensive scheme. It would have been hard to make it work at Tampa. But his running game was always a strong point. Although this came later, it's his most iconic play and one of the most iconic runs period, which came against the Vikings in 1988.
Young, back to throw. In trouble, he's going to be sacked. No, gets away. He runs, gets away again, goes to the 40, gets away again. At the 35, cuts back at the 30, to the 20, the 50, the 10. He dies. Touchdown, 49ers.
And in the Super Bowl win against the Chargers, he was the leading rusher with 49 yards on 4 carries. Despite his late start in the NFL at 30 years old, he still ranked 6th all-time in quarterback rushing yards and 3rd in quarterback rushing touchdowns. Then you had the passing game, which needed to be developed. He was never taught how to pass properly and was inaccurate early on. He only completed 41% of his passes in high school. By the time he got to college though, he had improved, setting a then NCAA record of a 71.3 completion percentage in his senior year and 65% over his entire college career. And once he got to the 49ers, his game would truly come together. When he retired, his 96.81 passer rating was #1, and he's tied for first with Sammy Baugh for the most passing titles at 6. Under the tutelage of Bill Walsh, the 49ers coaching staff, and sitting behind Joe Montana, Young managed to go from a scrambler to an elite passer who could kill you with a run when needed. Despite arriving there in 1987 and getting occasional playing time, he wouldn't take over till 1991 when Montana got injured. But Young was accustomed to being a backup, although he may not have loved it. At college, he was Jim McMahon's backup until he was drafted by the Bears in 1982. But before taking the starting role, there was some QB controversy. I mean, imagine 2 of the greatest quarterbacks vying for the starting job. It's the modern media's dream. Bill Walsh would say there's a quarterback controversy developing, and he certainly didn't help. He initially told Young when he got there, Montana would not recover from back surgery. Turns out that was not the case, and there would be games where Walsh would put Young in when the 49ers were down, only stirring the pot more. For example, in the 1987 divisional playoff game, Steve Young took over in the second half after the 49ers found themselves down 27-10 to the Vikings. Montana would be the one to end this controversy, however, leading the 49ers to back-to-back Super Bowl wins. Even once Young got the starting role for good, he faced more obstacles. People questioned the decision to go with him at times. In 1991, he got injured and missed 6 games. Another Steve Bono, took over and went 5-1. There were calls for Bono to replace Young, who had gone 4-4 up to the injury. Bono actually kept the starting job until he got injured in the final game of the season. During the offseason, the 49ers considered trading Steve Young. Montana was now healthy, and Bono showed he could win. One of the best offers came from the Raiders, who offered the #1 pick and wide receiver Tim Brown. However, they never reached a deal and Young would stay. And 1992 would be his year. He rushed for a career-high 537 yards, led in passing touchdowns, completion percentage, and passer rating, on his way to his first MVP. Despite a great year, the 49ers lost to Dallas in the NFC title game, and would lose again in 1993. 1994 would be peak Young. After winning another MVP, and breaking the then record for passer rating in a season, he'd first lead the 49ers to a 39-28 victory over Dallas. That would be followed by a decisive Super Bowl victory over the Chargers, finishing with a record 6 touchdowns in a 49-26 win. This particular play came later in his career, but it's one of his most iconic, and shows how he developed as a passer. Young stumbles as he snaps the ball. He manages to regain his balance, and then throw a dart to Owens, who was surrounded by 4 Packers players. They'd win that game in the final seconds. To build on this point of an elite arm, he led the league in passing touchdowns 4 times and completion percentage 5 times. From 1995 to 1997, the 49ers would come up short in the playoffs, but Young would still lead the league in completion percentage and yards per game in 1995, and passer rating in 1996 and 1997. But after a big hit that left him concussed in 1999, Young would not step back on the field, ultimately ending an all-time great career.